You're listening to the Valley Current.
I want you to picture something for a second.
Okay.
Imagine the entire world, like all 8 billion of us, collectively holding our breath.
Right, and not just as some abstract metaphor either.
No, exactly. As a literal economic and geopolitical reality. Because we are sitting at day 42 of what the history books are already calling Operation Epic Fury.
It's still just surreal to even say that out loud.
It really is. I mean, global oil markets are in absolute chaos right now. Thousands of massive cargo ships, including the world's largest oil supertankers, are physically trapped in the ocean.
Just completely unable to move.
Yep. And for the first time since 1979, since the Iranian Revolution fundamentally redrew the map of the Middle East. Officials from the United States and Iran are sitting in the exact same room, looking each other in the eye.
The sheer historical whiplash of this moment, it's difficult to overstate.
Oh, absolutely.
We are watching an unprecedented kinetic military conflict happening at the exact same millisecond as an unprecedented wave of face-to-face diplomacy.
Which is so rare.
It is. Usually, wars end, a victor is declared or an exhaustion point is reached, and then the diplomats step in. But here, the bombs are falling and the treaties are being drafted simultaneously.
Which brings us to the core mission of this deep dive. Because we're trying to make sense of this chaos for you.
And to do that, we've gotten our hands on a really incredible source.
Yeah, it's basically a leaked-level blueprint of these talks. It's an internal intelligence briefing. Specifically, it's the Computer Law Group LLP Special Geopolitical and Diplomatic Report.
Put together by industry insider Jack Russo.
Right. It's dated April 11th, 2026. And rather than just a grind news summary, this document gives us a literal X-ray of the room where this is happening.
It really does. It details all the tactical, economic, and political fault lines of the Islamabad talks.
And it breaks down the incredibly fragile ceasefire that is currently acting as, well, basically the only glue holding the Middle East together right now.
But before we go any further, we need to make our stance absolutely clear to you, the listener.
Yes, very important point.
We are going to be exploring some deeply polarizing, highly charged military actions and political realities today.
And our goal here is not to take a side.
Exactly, or to pass moral judgment on the combatants. Our purpose is purely to synthesize the intelligence presented in this specific Computer Law Group report so you can understand the mechanics of the situation.
Right. We were just analyzing the stated positions of the actors, the raw data, and those systemic ripple effects across the globe.
And those ripple effects are exactly why you need to pay attention to this.
Yeah, you might be wondering why the seating arrangements in a hotel in Pakistan matter to your daily life.
It matters a lot.
Let me promise you, this is not distant, abstract geopolitics. The fault lines we're exploring today are directly dictating the price you are paying at the gas pump this very afternoon.
They are rewriting the cost of goods on your grocery store shelves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Threatening the stability of global supply chains and basically redefining the future of international trade.
It's all connected.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we need to move from those massive global stakes right down to the heavily guarded physical space where history is actually unfolding.
Right, because the physical environment of a diplomatic summit often dictates the boundaries of what is actually possible. And the setting here is the Serena Hotel in Islamabad, Pakistan.
But we aren't just talking about renting out a convention hall for the weekend.
Oh, far from it. The report notes that starting on April 9th, the entire property was requisitioned.
Just think about the logistics of that for a second. They cleared out every single civilian guest.
Everyone. And then the Pakistani security apparatus established a 3-kilometer red zone around the hotel.
A 3-kilometer radius. In a dense capital city, that is a massive footprint.
It's huge. They deployed thousands of security forces and actually declared a public holiday in Islamabad from April 9th to the 11th.
So they literally shut down the normal functioning of a major world capital just to guarantee the physical security of this single building.
Yeah, into this absolute fortress steps the Iranian delegation. And the composition of this group tells us everything about their intent.
Right. How many people did they bring?
They brought 71 members.
Wow.
Yeah. A delegation of 71 is not a small, exploratory diplomatic team feeling out the situation.
No, that is an entire bureaucratic apparatus being airlifted into a combat zone.
Exactly. It signifies they are ready to make structural, binding decisions on the spot. Leading this massive group is Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf.
And the report specifically points out his connections, right?
Yes. Crucially, the CLG report identifies him not just by his title, but as a direct confidant of the supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei.
That's a huge detail.
It is. He is flanked by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, and they have brought 5 specific committees with them: political, military, economic, legal, and media logistics.
Just a fully loaded team.
Yeah.
And sitting across the table from that massive apparatus is the United States delegation.
Led by Vice President J.D. Vance.
Right. He is acting as the lead negotiator, and he's brought a very specialized team himself. You have Steve Witkoff,
the special presidential envoy.
Yeah, and the actual architect of the 15-point U.S. framework that's being debated. Plus, you have Jared Kushner acting as a presidential advisor, along with a full suite of U.S. subject matter experts.
It's a heavy-hitting room.
Very. But what I found most fascinating in this section of the report was the mechanical evolution of the talks themselves.
Yeah, the format shifted dramatically in a very short window. So on Saturday morning, things began under the framework of proximity diplomacy,
which is often referred to as shuttle diplomacy.
Right.
For those unfamiliar with the term, proximity diplomacy is a format used when the political temperature is simply too high or the trust is just too low for the parties to breathe the same air.
So the U.S. and Iranian teams were in completely separate rooms inside the Serena Hotel.
Right. The Pakistani mediators, specifically Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and his specialized team, were physically carrying written notes and verbal messages back and forth down the hallway.
It's an incredibly slow, painstaking way to negotiate.
It is slow, but often necessary to prevent immediate walkouts when tensions are this high.
Absolutely. What is remarkable here, though, is that by Saturday afternoon, that proximity format was totally abandoned.
It rapidly evolved into direct 3-party negotiations.
The Pakistani mediators remained in the room to facilitate, but Vice President Vance and Speaker Ghalibaf were suddenly sharing the same physical space.
Written texts were being slid directly across a table.
In the world of high-stakes diplomacy, shifting from separate rooms to direct engagement in a matter of hours represents an undeniable mutual desire to actually hash out a framework.
It does. But we really had to talk about the psychological temperature of that room.
We do.
Because while they agreed to sit across from one another, the Iranian delegation utilized a negotiation tactic upon their arrival that is, it's genuinely hard to process.
It is. The report details their arrival in Islamabad late Friday, and it sets a really dark, heavy tone right off the bat.
Yeah. They arrived on a flight that Ghalibaf deliberately designated as Manab 168.
The naming of the flight is an act of intense, calculated psychological framing.
Break that down for us. What does Manab 168 mean?
Well, Manab 168 is a direct commemoration of 168 people, a group that tragically included 110 school children who were killed in a U.S. military strike on a primary school in Manab on the very first day of Operation Epic Fury.
It's just devastating. And they didn't stop at just naming the airplane.
No, they didn't. Foreign Minister Araghchi literally physically carried blood-stained school bags belonging to the victims of that strike off the plane and into the diplomatic summit.
I want to unpack the mechanics of this from a negotiating standpoint. If you are Vice President Vance, how do you even begin a dry, technical conversation about maritime logistics or unfreezing economic assets or uranium enrichment when the opposing side has placed the physical, blood-stained evidence of collateral damage on the table?
It's staggering.
It feels like an impossible starting point.
Yeah. It is an extreme, highly provocative tactic, but it serves a very specific dual-purpose strategy for them.
How so?
Well, domestically, back in Iran, broadcasting those images of the school bags shows a populace that is facing severe hardship that their leaders are holding the U.S. accountable.
Right, it plays to the base.
Exactly. And diplomatically, it establishes a severe moral baseline before a single technical word is spoken.
That makes sense.
Ghalibaf's opening quote upon arrival perfectly encapsulates this strategy. He stated to the press, and I quote, "Our experience of negotiations with the Americans has always been met with failure and breach of promise. They attacked us twice in the middle of the negotiations. We have goodwill, but no trust."
Wow. And Vice President Vance, operating on his own strategic track, countered that sentiment before he even departed Joint Base Andrews.
He did.
He told reporters he thought the talks would be positive, but he linked down a very stark, unambiguous warning. He essentially broadcasted that if the Iranian delegation tried to play games or stall the U.S. team, they would find a completely unreceptive audience.
So the stage is set. You have this incredibly tense, heavily fortified room where texts are finally being exchanged.
But the tragedy outlined in the CLG report is that what is happening outside the Serena Hotel is actively threatening to tear the entire diplomatic framework to pieces.
Right. The report identifies 3 massive active fault lines that are fracturing the foundation of these talks as they happen.
Let's get into those. The first of these fault lines is located in Lebanon.
And it revolves around a terrifying fundamental disconnect over what the word ceasefire actually means in practice.
The timeline here is dizzying. The general ceasefire for the region is announced on April 7th. Literally hours after that announcement, Israel launches its largest single military strike of the entire 2026 war into Lebanese territory.
The operation is labeled Operation Eternal Darkness.
The name alone is ominous.
The sheer logistical scale of the military action is staggering. The data shows 50 Israeli Air Force jets dropping approximately 160 bombs on over 100 separate targets.
And this is all within a 10-minute window, right?
Right. Yes. A 10-minute window. This bombardment hit central Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, Sidon, and Tyre. Crucially, the intelligence report notes that many of these strikes occurred without any prior warning to civilian populations.
The human toll was instantaneous and just devastating. Lebanon's health ministry reported at least 303 people killed and over 1,000 wounded in what the government in Beirut officially dubbed Black Wednesday.
Now, to maintain our neutrality here, we really must look at the logic provided by the Israel Defense Forces.
Of course.
According to Defense Minister Katz, this massive operation was planned weeks in advance of any ceasefire talks.
Right, they had this on the book.
And Israel maintained that it was going to proceed regardless. Israel still has 5 full military divisions deployed in southern Lebanon.
And following the airstrikes, Hezbollah immediately retaliated by launching waves of rockets into northern Israel.
Which brings us to the structural mechanics of how international agreements actually function, or in this case, how they fail.
The diplomatic disconnect regarding this specific operation is profound.
It really is. When the ceasefire was first announced, Pakistan's prime minister and the United States government initially framed the pause as comprehensive.
Yeah, they explicitly utilized language stating the ceasefire covered Lebanon and elsewhere.
But then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses the media and explicitly, categorically states that the ceasefire does not include Lebanon.
I want to offer an analogy here to explain how bizarre this is at a statecraft level.
Go for it.
It's like 2 neighbors agreeing to a strict neighborhood noise ordinance to keep the peace. One neighbor thinks the agreement means no playing loud music after 9 p.m.
Makes sense.
But the other neighbor thinks the agreement means he can't play music.
Yeah.
But he is completely permitted to bulldoze the house next door.
Right.
They have entirely fundamentally different understandings of what the actual rules of engagement are.
And that definitional gap is exactly the wedge that threatens to break the table in Islamabad.
How did that gap even happen?
Well, the CLG report provides the backchannel context for how this discrepancy occurred. It notes that President Trump initially included Lebanon in the parameters of the deal.
Okay.
But then he reversed that inclusion following a direct phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Wow, just one phone call.
Yeah. This rapid shift in policy led Vice President Vance to publicly refer to the entire situation as a legitimate misunderstanding.
A legitimate misunderstanding. I mean, for the Iranian delegation, a 100-target bombing campaign in Beirut is not a misunderstanding. It is an absolute red line.
Exactly.
The report quotes Mohammad, the Iranian national security advisor, who stated the position point blank. He said, without fully restraining America's rabid dog in Lebanon, there will be no ceasefire or negotiations and the missiles are ready to launch.
It just highlights the extreme fragility of the process. You have diplomats arguing over the text of an agreement, while the operational reality on the ground contradicts that text entirely.
It's mind-boggling.
But Lebanon, as complex as it is, represents a political and definitional misunderstanding. As the report details, the second fault line isn't a misunderstanding of words.
No, it's much more tangible than that.
It is a literal, physical, and economic blockade that is systematically choking the life out of the global economy.
This brings us to fault line 2, the stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz. Because this is the exact moment where international diplomacy hits the listener's wallet directly.
Absolutely.
To understand the gravity of this crisis, we have to establish the pre-war baseline. Before Operation Epic Fury began, 135 massive commercial ships passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day.
Think about that volume.
We were talking about roughly 20% of all global seaborne oil moving through a single geographic bottleneck.
It is the primary artery of the industrialized world. 20% of the global oil supply moving through a maritime channel that is, at its narrowest point, only 21 miles wide.
21 miles.
And the shipping lanes themselves are even narrower to accommodate the deep drafts of those very large crude carriers.
Right. So compare that baseline of 135 ships a day to April 11th, which was day 4 of the fragile ceasefire.
Yeah, the numbers are grim.
On that specific day, only 3 oil supertankers managed to transit the strait, and the report notes that this was actually celebrated as the biggest day of oil exits since the war began.
3 ships.
3 ships. The most vital energy corridor on Earth is operating at 90% below its normal capacity.
The logistical nightmare this creates across global supply chains cannot be overstated. The report quantifies the physical trap. There are currently 3,200 commercial vessels stranded in the region.
3,200 vessels.
That means 20,000 international seafarers are physically trapped on their ships, unable to move forward or backward.
That's practically a small city of people just stuck on the water.
Exactly. And there are over 800 ships trapped entirely inside the Persian Gulf, effectively locked in.
It's not just a traffic jam caused by caution either. It is a highly coordinated, literal hostage situation.
It really is.
Iran has openly admitted to laying sophisticated naval mines throughout the strait. They even went so far as to publish a map detailing the heavily mined areas alongside what they claim were designated safe routes.
And here is the economic kicker. Iran, operating in coordination with Oman, is planning to charge a transit toll of $1 to $2 million per tanker to use those safe routes.
$1 to $2 million per ship.
Yes, that breaks down to roughly $1 extra per barrel of oil. Furthermore, they are demanding this payment be made exclusively in Chinese yuan or cryptocurrency.
Wow, entirely bypassing the US dollar and the Western banking system.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the evolution of asymmetric warfare.
How so?
Well, modern conflict is being dictated just as much by insurance actuaries sitting in syndicate offices in Lloyd's of London as it is by admirals deploying fleets in the Persian Gulf.
That is wild.
The primary structural barrier preventing the resumption of global trade isn't merely the physical presence of the naval mines, it is the complete weaponization of the global maritime insurance industry.
I want to break down the mechanics of this because it's a brilliant, if terrifying, strategy. How does an insurance underwriter, thousands of miles away, effectively stop a 300,000-ton supertanker?
It comes down to liability.
Right.
You simply cannot legally or financially move a massive commercial vessel without comprehensive war risk insurance.
Okay.
The CLG report notes that due to the active presence of mines and the unpredictable kinetic environment, these premiums have absolutely skyrocketed.
What were they before the war?
Pre-war, a standard war risk premium for a transit through the strait was roughly 0.125 to 0.25% of a ship's total hull value.
Okay, pretty manageable.
Today, that premium has surged to between 5 and 10%.
5 to 10%?
Yeah. The math on that increase basically destroys the economic viability of shipping.
Give us an example.
Sure. If a shipping conglomerate operates a modern oil tanker valued at $100 million, they now face a $5 to $10 million fee, purely in insurance costs, for a single one-way transit through the strait.
Just for the insurance?
Just the insurance. The shipping companies simply will not risk a $100 million asset hitting a mine, and the insurers refuse to underwrite that immense risk without charging catastrophic, prohibitive premiums.
And the United States government is actively trying to fix this via financial brute force.
Right.
Right.
They are trying, yes.
The report details how the U.S. utilized the International Development Finance Corporation to double its reinsurance commitment to a staggering $40 billion.
$40 billion.
They were essentially backstopping major commercial insurers like AIG and Berkshire Hathaway, telling them the U.S. government will cover the catastrophic losses if ships blow up.
Right. But even with $40 billion of sovereign backing, the market remains paralyzed.
Why is that?
Because sovereign backing mitigates financial ruin, but it doesn't clear the physical danger fast enough to restore actual confidence. An analyst from eToro cited in the report estimates it could take 6 months just to process the backlog and restore normal ship traffic patterns.
6 months.
Yeah. You have the CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, Sultan Al Jaber, looking at the situation and stating bluntly, Let's be clear. The Strait of Hormuz is not open. Access is being restricted, conditioned, and controlled.
So we have a complete systemic economic standoff.
Complete paralysis.
A financial and logistical paralysis that sets the stage perfectly for Fault Line 3. Because while the diplomats are sitting in Islamabad trying to negotiate an end to the crisis, and the insurance syndicates in London are mathematically pricing the risk of the crisis.
The world's navies are actively confronting each other in the water.
Yes. This brings us to the kinetic paradox of this historical moment. Fault Line 3 is the direct physical clash between U.S. Navy mine-clearing operations and Iranian claims of territorial sovereignty.
It's incredibly volatile.
According to the intelligence brief, on April 11th, the exact same day that Vice President Vance and Speaker Ghalibaf were sliding proposals across the table in Pakistan, the United States drastically escalated its military posture in the Strait.
What did they do?
2 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, the USS Frank E. Peterson and the USS Michael Murphy, executed a transit of the Strait.
Wow.
These are the first U.S. warships to push through since the war began. Simultaneously, CENTCOM officially announced the commencement of active mine clearance operations, stating their objective was to establish a secure, verified passage for the maritime industry.
A military action of that magnitude is immediately amplified in the political theater, naturally.
Oh, immediately.
President Trump took to Truth Social to frame the narrative. He claimed that he was ordering the clearing of the Strait of Hormuz as a favor to countries all over the world.
Okay.
He then went significantly further, asserting that U.S. military forces had successfully engaged and sunk all 28 of Iran's mine-laying vessels.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the reality of what actually transpired on the water that day is completely fractured depending on who you listen to.
It's the definition of the fog of war.
Following the U.S. statements, Iran completely denied that the U.S. transit even occurred.
They denied it entirely.
Entirely. They labeled the announced U.S. mine-clearing operation a blatant violation of the April 7th ceasefire. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, publicly vowed a strong response to any unauthorized military ships entering their claimed waters.
And it gets messier.
It does. To add to the confusion, the Fars news agency in Iran published a report claiming that a U.S. destroyer actually reversed course and turned back after receiving a direct Iranian warning.
A warning that was apparently relayed in real time through the Pakistani mediators.
Yes, we are witnessing the classic fog of war playing out in high definition.
The CLG report astutely points out that these competing operational accounts cannot be independently reconciled.
You just can't verify it right now.
You have the United States firmly claiming it neutralized 28 hostile boats and is actively clearing the strait, and you have Iran firmly claiming the U.S. retreated and that the vital waterway remains entirely under Iranian sovereign control.
The surrealism of the situation is almost cinematic.
It really is.
Imagine being J.D. Vance or Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. You are sitting in an air-conditioned room in a luxury hotel, intensely discussing the nuanced mechanisms of unfreezing banking assets and establishing diplomatic frameworks.
Meanwhile, your respective militaries are potentially actively shooting at each other.
Or at the very least playing a lethal, high-stakes game of naval chicken in the world's most important shipping lane at that exact moment.
It perfectly underscores why the proximity diplomacy format had to be abandoned for direct talks. The situation on the water is so incredibly volatile that relying on third-party mediators to carry written notes down a hotel hallway is simply too slow.
Right. Time is a luxury they don't have.
A miscommunication that takes an hour to resolve diplomatically could result in a sunken destroyer or a closed strait militarily.
Having explored these 3 highly combustible fault lines, the definitional breakdown of the bombing campaign in Lebanon, the economic chokehold created by shipping insurance, and the kinetic naval standoff in Hormuz, we really need to take a step back.
We do.
We need to look at the actual quantifiable damage these 42 days of Operation Epic Fury have inflicted on the human race and the global economic system.
Because Section 5 of the CLG report provides the raw, unvarnished data regarding the human and economic toll, and it is a grim ledger.
Let's examine the casualty figures first, as tallied on day 42.
The numbers are devastating. According to human rights groups and regional health ministries cited in the brief, there are over 3,636 Iranians confirmed dead.
And that includes civilians, right?
Yes, that specific figure includes over 1,700 civilians, though the report acknowledges alternative estimates suggesting thousands of additional unconfirmed military casualties.
In Lebanon, the toll from the continued strikes stands at over 1,953 dead.
Furthermore, an astounding 1.2 million Lebanese people have been internally displaced.
Think about the logistics of that for a moment. 1.2 million people is roughly 20% of Lebanon's entire population.
Just forced to abandon their homes overnight.
Exactly. It puts unimaginable strain on whatever water, medical, and food infrastructure remains.
And in Israel, the data lists over 40 dead, though the report caveats that the IDF has not released a comprehensive, finalized casualty figure.
Regarding the United States military personnel, CENTCOM currently reports 13 dead and 303 wounded.
And the report notes that the vast majority of these injuries are categorized as traumatic brain injuries.
I want to clarify what that means, because traumatic brain injury, or TBI, can sound clinical.
Yeah, it masks the severity.
When a massive ballistic missile strikes a military installation like the Prince Sultan Air Base, even if personnel are safely secured deep inside reinforced concrete bunkers, the sheer concussive shockwave of the explosion alters the atmospheric pressure violently enough to cause physical damage to the brain inside the skull.
It is a severe, often life-altering invisible wound.
Additionally, the report mentions investigative journalism, suggesting the Pentagon may be undercounting overall casualty figures by excluding personnel involved in a separate fire incident aboard the USS Ford.
The profound human cost of this conflict runs in parallel with an economic shockwave that is literally reshaping the world order.
Let's look at the petroleum markets.
Good idea. When the initial ceasefire was announced on April 8th, the markets reacted with a massive record-breaking drop in prices.
Right. WTI, that's West Texas Intermediate, the benchmark for U.S. crude oil crashed over 16%.
And Brent crude, which is the primary international benchmark, plunged over 13%.
Algorithmic trading in futures markets priced in the immediate end of the conflict, resulting in the biggest single-day price decline since the chaotic market anomalies of April 2020.
But that financial relief was an illusion. It was incredibly temporary.
Why?
Because, as we just discussed regarding the naval mines, the Strait of Hormuz remained effectively closed. The insurance actuaries calculating risk in London did not care about a diplomatic press release announcing a ceasefire.
They cared about the physical metal in the water.
Precisely. Once the market realized the oil was still trapped, prices rebounded violently. As of April 11th, WTI is trading near $95.81 a barrel, and Brent is sitting at $95.20.
To put that in context, that is roughly $25 to $30 above pre-war stability levels.
And during the peak panic of the war, the intraday record hit over $144 for a barrel of Brent.
For the average American consumer, this translates to an average price of gasoline hovering at $4.16 a gallon.
Which is an increase of audible 18 cents since the conflict initiated.
Furthermore, institutions like Goldman Sachs are issuing dire warnings. If Hormuz remains closed for another month, Brent could average over $100 throughout the entirety of 2026.
And JP Morgan is eyeing a catastrophic $120 per barrel for the third quarter.
But the metric that truly defines the existential scale of this crisis isn't the price per barrel. It is the physical supply disruption.
Yes, the sheer volume of missing oil.
The intelligence report calculates that 9.1 million barrels per day of crude oil production has been shut in.
9.1 million barrels.
Every single day. This means nations like Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain have collectively halted their oil production because the oil physically has nowhere to go.
It is the largest single supply disruption in modern economic history.
I want to spend some time on this because 9.1 million barrels a day is a number so large it loses meaning. We need to look at the butterfly effect of a deficit this massive.
Exactly. It touches everything.
When 9.1 million barrels of oil fail to enter the global market every 24 hours, the impact isn't just felt at the gas pump. Oil is the foundational ingredient of the modern world.
Right.
A supertanker trapped in the Persian Gulf means a plastics manufacturing plant in Germany doesn't receive its raw materials a month later.
And then what happens?
When that plant shuts down, the price of specialized medical tubing required in American hospitals spikes 400% a week after that. It impacts the cost of the diesel fuel required to transport fresh food to your local grocery store.
It impacts the cost of the natural gas derivatives required to heat homes across Europe.
Every single supply chain on planet Earth shudders when a deficit this large occurs.
The International Energy Agency attempted to mitigate this by coordinating a record release from global strategic petroleum reserves, right?
Yeah, they dumped 2 to 3 million barrels a day onto the market. But a 3 million barrel Band-Aid does not stop the bleeding of a 9.1 million barrel gunshot wound.
It is a systemic cascading failure of the global energy architecture. Which brings us to the most fascinating intellectual puzzle presented in the entire CLG report.
Gotcha.
With the stakes this historically high, with the global economy bleeding out and thousands of people dead, what is the actual strategic mindset of the two negotiating teams sitting in the Serena Hotel? How do they perceive their own leverage?
Yes. The CLG report tackles this question by highlighting an incredible segment from the PBS NewsHour.
That segment was so revealing.
It featured two former U.S. government officials who offer completely opposing, yet simultaneously accurate views of Iran's negotiating position. This is the central strategic paradox at the heart of the Islamabad talks.
Let's look at the first perspective provided by Alan Ayer.
He was a key member of the Obama administration's JCPOA negotiating team.
Right. For context, the JCPOA is the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. So Ayer knows the Iranian diplomatic playbook intimately.
What's his take on the current situation?
His argument is that the U.S. military campaign operation, Epic Fury, actually created a massive unintended consequence.
Yeah.
He argues that by attacking Iran militarily, the U.S. inadvertently allowed Iran to discover and weaponize a brand new strategic lever.
The closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly. Ayer makes a brilliant analytical distinction here. For decades, the primary existential threat Iran posed to the West was its latent nuclear enrichment program.
The fear was always that they would develop a bomb.
Right. But a nuclear weapon is a future theoretical threat. Successfully closing the Strait of Hormuz with a few dozen cheap naval mines is a present, immediate reality that costs the global economy trillions of dollars in a matter of days.
So the latent nuclear threat has been entirely supplanted by this active geographic chokehold.
Yes. And Ayer's most chilling point is that Western military supremacy fundamentally cannot solve this problem.
Because we just discussed the U.S. sending in billion-dollar guided missile destroyers to clear the mines.
But Ayer points out that to keep the strait closed, Iran doesn't actually need to defeat the U.S. Navy in a pitched naval battle. All they have to do, in his exact words, is spook the insurance market.
Spook the insurance market.
Wow. You don't need a carrier strike group to do that. You just need a few fast attack boats, some cheap contact mines, and a guy with a rocket-propelled grenade willing to take a shot at a commercial hull.
Because the insurance market is inherently structurally risk-averse. Actuaries aren't grading military supremacy. They're grading financial liability.
Exactly. Ayer's prescription is that you simply cannot bomb your way out of an insurance crisis. You must negotiate a political resolution that lowers the perceived risk.
He explicitly urges the U.S. negotiating team to avoid what he calls strategic attention deficit disorder. He argues they must commit to grueling, all-day, everyday negotiations for months if necessary to solve this.
Okay, so that is Ayer's view. Iran is sitting at the table dealing from a position of massive, newly discovered asymmetric strength.
But then the report presents the second expert, Miad Maliki.
Right, a senior analyst from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, or FDD.
Maliki was born and raised in Iran, and his argument is the complete 180-degree inverse of Ayer's assessment.
Yes. Maliki argues that Iran is absolutely not negotiating from a position of strength, but rather from a state of sheer existential desperation.
He points out that underneath all the aggressive posturing, the Iranian economy is entirely bankrupt.
The regime is facing severe ongoing domestic protests fueled by economic ruin.
In his view, Iran desperately needed the April 7th ceasefire more than anyone else involved because the regime is fighting for its very survival against its own citizens.
Maliki basically asserts that the regime is going to use the ceasefire window strictly to reconstitute its depleted military capabilities, not to actually negotiate a lasting, comprehensive peace.
He believes they are fundamentally incapable of making a genuine agreement. Because showing weakness or making broad concessions to the United States would trigger even more massive domestic uprisings when the Iranian people see what was given away.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the true value of the CLG report is how it masterfully synthesizes these two opposing views.
Also,
the paradox is that both Ayer and Maliki are completely right.
That seems impossible on its face. How can they both be right? One expert says Iran is holding the ultimate economic trump card, and the other expert says Iran is a completely bankrupt, desperate state on the verge of collapse.
Because the reality is that Iran is a bankrupt, desperate country that just so happens to have its hands wrapped tightly around the throat of the global economy. This dual reality makes them incredibly complex and dangerous to negotiate with.
Because they are simultaneously more negotiable, since their economy is in absolute ruins, and they desperately need sanctions relief and access to global capital, And they are significantly more dangerous.
Exactly, because a bankrupt regime facing imminent domestic collapse has very little left to lose by escalating the conflict and taking the global economy down with them.
I want you to really ponder the geometry of that for a second. Put yourself in J.D. Vance's shoes.
It's quite a position to be in.
How do you negotiate with an adversary who is backed entirely into a corner, facing internal revolt, yet happens to hold the keys to 20% of your daily energy supply?
It's an impossible diplomatic tightrope. If you push them too hard militarily, they fully collapse the strait, the global economy crashes, and inflation skyrockets back home.
But if you give them too much financially, you legitimize state-sponsored hostage-taking of international shipping lanes.
And the U.S. delegation is trying to walk that impossible tightrope while fighting against multiple unyielding, ticking clocks.
In international diplomacy, time is often the ultimate enemy, and time is running out rapidly in Islamabad.
Let's examine those clocks, because the deadlines are terrifying. The CLG mediator's assessment portion of the brief states clearly that the goal in Islamabad right now isn't to achieve a full, lasting, comprehensive peace treaty.
Given the animosity, that's impossible in this time frame.
Exactly. The definition of success is simply establishing a framework to extend the current, highly flawed ceasefire past its imminent expiration date of April 21st.
The milestones required for that success are incredibly specific, yet modest.
What are they asking for?
Well, the mediators want to establish a 30-day extension mechanism. They are pushing for a partial unfreezing of Iranian financial assets held abroad to serve as a gesture of goodwill.
Okay.
Furthermore, they want an IAEA-supervised freeze on Iran's stockpile of 60% enriched uranium.
To provide context, the IAEA is the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's nuclear watchdog.
Right, and uranium enriched to 60% is highly volatile. It is a hair's breadth away from the 90% enrichment required for weapons-grade material. Freezing that stockpile is a critical U.S. objective.
Crucially, the mediators also acknowledge that the Lebanon issue, the Operation Eternal Darkness fault line we discussed earlier, is too complex to solve here and requires its own entirely separate, parallel negotiating track.
So the immediate diplomatic clock runs out on April 21st. But there is a parallel, equally dangerous clock ticking in Washington, D.C.
And it is a strict constitutional one.
This involves the U.S. War Powers Resolution.
Right. Under United States law, the president has a 60-day window to utilize military force abroad before requiring explicit statutory congressional authorization to continue operations.
And that 60-day clock for Operation Epic Fury expires on April 28th or 29th.
And the political machinery in Washington is gearing up for a fight. Congress returns from recess on April 14th. The intelligence brief notes that Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is already pushing to hold a fourth war powers vote the very week they return.
It's not just a partisan issue either. You have prominent Republican senators like Susan Collins and John Curtis signaling that they might cross the aisle to support authorization requirements, demanding the executive branch justify the continued military action.
On top of that, every single dollar of the proposed $200 billion supplemental military appropriations request requires a floor vote.
This is the grim structural reality of the situation. You have the Islamabad talks racing desperately against the April 21st ceasefire expiration date, and simultaneously you have the Washington political machinery racing against the April 29th constitutional deadline.
The danger is that a handshake agreement in a hotel in Pakistan does not automatically grant statutory authorization or funding in Washington, D.C.
These are two entirely separate, highly politicized tracks, and a derailment on either one collapses the entire global effort.
So what does this all mean? With all these clocks ticking down to zero and the strait still completely paralyzed by mines and catastrophic insurance premiums, how do they actually solve the Hormuz problem?
Because the CLG report details a very specific, highly creative solution that could potentially give everyone a face-saving way out of the crisis.
The report titles this concept the Hormuz creative space.
It acknowledges that Iran's initial demand for a $1 to $2 million transit fee per ship is a massive provocation that the West cannot simply accept.
But hidden within that extortionate demand, there is a potential diplomatic landing zone.
The proposal is to bypass a direct toll paid to a sanctioned Iranian entity and instead create a formalized trilateral maritime coordination protocol between Iran, the neutral nation of Oman, and the United States.
The genius of this proposed solution lies entirely in the art of the rebrand.
Rebranding is everything in diplomacy.
In the high-stakes world of diplomacy, you can rarely give an adversary exactly what they want if it is framed as a concession. But if you fundamentally change the vocabulary of the agreement, you can change the political reality.
So how does the rebrand actually work in practice here?
Instead of labeling the $1 to $2 million fee as a toll or a concession to Iranian extortion, the diplomats rebrand the payment as a required contribution to a regional navigation framework.
Ah, I see.
Under this newly named framework, Iran gets to maintain the appearance of nominal territorial sovereignty and receives partial revenues, satisfying their domestic need for a victory.
And what does the West get?
In exchange, the commercial shipping companies receive a guaranteed, verified safe passage through the mined waters.
Most importantly, the global insurance companies receive verifiable, military-grade mine clearance data.
Exactly, which provides the actuarial certainty they need to drastically lower their war risk premiums back to manageable levels.
And the diplomatic model for this kind of arrangement already exists. The CLG report explicitly points to the Black Sea grain corridor that was established during the Russia-Ukraine war.
Right. In that conflict, they figured out a way to move essential agricultural cargo through an active, heavily mined naval war zone by creating a specialized trilateral coordination mechanism involving Russia, Ukraine, and Turkey.
This Hormuz proposal is exactly the same concept adapted for oil. Iran gets to declare on state television that they are managing regional security.
The U.S. gets to declare to the world that they restored freedom of navigation without getting bogged down in a protracted multi-year naval war.
And the actuaries in London get the hard data they need to underwrite the hulls of the supertankers.
It proves that the mechanical frameworks for peace are available. The blueprints exist. The levers of power are deeply understood by both sides of the table.
The ultimate tragedy is that the temporal window to implement these brilliant solutions is incredibly terrifyingly small, and the foundational level of trust between the two nations is practically non-existent.
And that brings us to the final summation of this incredible intelligence brief.
Let's take a deep breath and recap the sheer historical magnitude of what we've just explored. We are analyzing a moment where, for the first time in 47 years, top-tier American and Iranian officials are negotiating face-to-face.
They're doing this while balancing the fate of the world on an absolute knife's edge.
You have billion-dollar U.S. Navy destroyers conducting active mine clearance operations while Iranian fast attack boats watch from miles away.
You have a massive, deadly diplomatic miscommunication over whether the nation of Lebanon is even included in the ceasefire agreement, resulting in hundreds of casualties.
And you have an unprecedented global economic panic caused by the sudden, sustained disappearance of 9.1 million barrels of oil a day.
We are observing a moment where kinetic events on the ground and physical realities in the water are moving vastly faster than the diplomats can draft the stabilizing paperwork.
The fragile ceasefire could expire tomorrow. The War Powers Act could trigger an unprecedented constitutional crisis in Washington next week. Or a single low-level miscalculation by a sailor in the Strait of Hormuz could reignite the entire region into full-scale war.
Which leaves us with a truly chilling realization about the evolving nature of modern geopolitical conflict. This raises an important question, and it's the thought I want to leave the listener with today. It builds directly on Alan Ayer's analysis of the Strait. We are witnessing the birth of a new doctrine we might call insurance-driven warfare.
Insurance-driven warfare.
Consider this reality. The United States possesses the most powerful, technologically advanced, and well-funded Navy in the history of human civilization. They have Aegis combat systems and guided missile destroyers actively patrolling the Strait of Hormuz.
And yet, all of that overwhelming military supremacy is effectively paralyzed by a handful of cheap naval mines and the resulting mathematical panic of insurance underwriters sitting in a comfortable office in London.
It's an astounding paradigm shift. You don't need to build a massive carrier strat group to cripple the global economy. You just need to alter the actuarial math enough to make the risk of commercial transit uninsurable. If a localized, highly asymmetric threat can reliably spike war risk premiums from 0.25% to 10% of a vessel's total hull value, it effectively shuts down global trade without firing a single shot at an enemy combatant.
It proves that military supremacy in the traditional sense is no longer sufficient to guarantee global commerce.
And if this tactic works this effectively in the Strait of Hormuz, what other vital global choke points are suddenly glaringly vulnerable to this new, incredibly cheap form of asymmetric economic warfare.
That's a scary thought.
What happens if this exact same tactic is applied to the Malacca Strait in Asia? Or the Panama Canal? Or the Red Sea? Are we entering an entirely new era of history where the flow of global trade is dictated not by international treaties and naval armadas, but by the risk-tolerance algorithms of corporate actuaries?
That is a deeply unsettling reality to ponder as we watch this all unfold. I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the CLG Intelligence Report.
Keep your eyes fixed on the Serena Hotel in Islamabad.
Watch the commercial shipping traffic data in the Strait of Hormuz and keep a close watch on your local gas prices, because the ripples from that single room in Pakistan are washing up on all our shores right now.
Remember the reality we started with. The entire world is holding its breath.
Staring at an X-ray of a highly fractured geopolitical landscape, waiting to see if these negotiators can figure out a way to stabilize the system before it shatters completely. We'll see you next time.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.